Pay attention to this courtroom footage from November 2019. When the defendant enters through those heavy wooden doors, flanked by 6 corrections officers in full tactical gear, the entire courtroom goes silent. Notice his face. That smile. Wide, unnatural, almost euphoric. 17-year-old Zachary Brennan walks to the defense table like he's walking onto a stage, and in his mind, that's exactly what this is. A performance. His moment. The media would call him the Manifesto Killer. But the 4 families sitting in the front row of that courtroom, holding each other as they watched this teenager grin his way through his own murder trial, they called him something else entirely. A monster who stole their children's futures because of words he read on the darkest corners of the internet. This is the story of how online radicalization turned a high school junior from Pinehurst, Colorado into a mass murderer. How ideology twisted a teenage mind until violence became a mission, and how one judge's words finally wiped that smile off his face. You know that feeling when you hear about a school shooting and think, not here. That doesn't happen in places like this. Pinehurst was exactly that kind of town. Population 8,500. 1 high school, 2 elementary schools, a main street with local shops where everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where parents didn't think twice about letting their kids walk to school or hang out at the community center on weekends. April 23, 2019, started like any other Tuesday at Pinehurst High School. Students filed into their second period classes. Teachers took attendance. The morning announcements crackled over the intercom with reminders about the spring dance and upcoming AP exams. Madison Cooper was 16 years old, captain of the debate team, volunteer at the animal shelter, already accepted to 3 colleges with scholarship offers. Her best friend Emma described her as someone who made everyone feel included, who stood up for kids who got bullied. She sat in the front row of Mr. Harrison's American history class because she loved asking questions. Derek Yang was 17, star of the swim team, planning to study engineering at Stanford. He tutored younger students in math every Thursday after school, never charging a dime. His parents had immigrated from Taiwan 15 years earlier, worked 2 jobs each to give their son opportunities. Derek was their pride and joy. Olivia Santos was 16. She played violin in the school orchestra, wrote poetry that her English teacher said was beyond her years. She'd just gotten her driver's license 2 weeks earlier and had been saving money from her job at the local diner to buy her first car. Christopher Hayes was 15, a sophomore. He loved skateboarding and wanted to be a graphic designer. He'd designed the logo for the school's art club and spent his lunch periods in the computer lab working on digital illustrations. His younger sister worshipped him. They were all sitting in their classrooms at 9:47 a.m. when Zachary Brennan walked through the front entrance of Pinehurst High School, carrying a duffel bag and wearing a tactical vest he'd ordered online. What happened next lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes that would shatter a community and end 4 young lives. But to understand how we got to that courtroom in November 2019, with Zachary smiling like he'd accomplished something heroic, we need to go back further. We need to understand who Zachary Brennan was before he became the Manifesto Killer. Zachary was born and raised in Pinehurst. His parents, Linda and Robert Brennan, owned a hardware store on Main Street. By all accounts, they were good people, active in their church, sponsors of the Youth Baseball League. They had 2 sons. Zachary's older brother, Daniel, was 22, working as an electrician, recently engaged. Zachary's childhood seemed normal enough. He played soccer until middle school, got decent grades, had a few friends. But something shifted around age 14. Teachers noticed he became more withdrawn. His friend group dwindled. He stopped participating in class discussions. What nobody knew was that Zachary had discovered online forums where his loneliness found a home, where his teenage frustrations about not fitting in, about girls not liking him, about feeling powerless in his own life, were validated and weaponized. These weren't just support groups for lonely teenagers. These were radicalization pipelines. By his junior year, Zachary was spending 6, 7, 8 hours a day on these sites, reading manifestos from previous mass shooters, treating them like scripture, participating in discussions that normalize violence, that framed murder as heroic resistance against a corrupt society. His bedroom walls were covered with printouts of posts from these forums, arranged like some kind of shrine. His parents thought he was just going through a phase, teenage angst. They had no idea their son was being radicalized in real time, marinating in an ideology that told him violence was the answer, that infamy was achievement, that killing innocent people would make him matter. Zachary began planning the attack in January 2019. He researched school layouts, studied timings, figured out when the most students would be in the hallways. He downloaded tactical manuals. He practiced at a shooting range 2 towns over, telling the instructor he was preparing for a career in law enforcement. He wrote a 47-page manifesto, filled with the same rhetoric, the same talking points, the same twisted logic he'd absorbed from those forums. He uploaded it to multiple sites at 9:30 a.m. on April 23rd, 17 minutes before he walked into that school. At 9:47 a.m., Zachary entered through the main entrance. The first person who saw him was Sarah Mitchell, a guidance counselor. She noticed the tactical vest, the duffel bag, and in that split second before Zachary pulled out the weapon, she screamed for everyone to run. That scream saved lives. Students in the hallway scattered. Teachers slammed doors and initiated lockdown procedures. But 4 students didn't make it to safety. Madison Cooper was in the hallway heading to her locker. She never had a chance. Derek Yang had stepped out of his chemistry class to get a drink of water. He was shot trying to help Madison. Olivia Santos was in the bathroom. She heard the commotion and opened the door to see what was happening. Wrong place, wrong time. Christopher Hayes was coming up the main stairwell. He saw Zachary and tried to run. He almost made it. The school resource officer, Deputy Marcus Fleming, engaged Zachary within 4 minutes. Those 4 minutes felt like hours to the students hiding in locked classrooms, hearing the sounds, smelling the smoke, texting their parents what they were sure would be their final goodbyes. Deputy Fleming's body camera footage would later be shown at trial. The prosecutor warned the jury it would be difficult to watch. It was. But it also showed Deputy Fleming's extraordinary courage. He advanced toward the threat while other officers secured evacuation routes. He ordered Zachary to drop his weapon. Zachary didn't drop it. He turned toward Deputy Fleming and raised his weapon. Fleming fired 3 times. Zachary went down. He survived. Later, he would tell investigators he'd expected to die that day, wanted to die. That was supposed to be his martyrdom moment. Instead, he woke up in a hospital bed under armed guard, facing 4 counts of first-degree murder and dozens of other charges. The investigation moved quickly. Detectives executed search warrants on the Brennan home within hours. What they found in Zachary's room was chilling. The printouts covering his walls, 3 journals filled with his plans, his ideology, his fantasies about becoming infamous. His computer was a roadmap of radicalization, browser history showing thousands of visits to extremist forums, downloaded videos of previous attacks, saved manifestos. Forensic psychologist Dr. Nathan Pierce evaluated Zachary in the weeks following his arrest. Pierce had evaluated dozens of violent offenders, but he later testified that Zachary's case stood out for how thoroughly the online radicalization had taken hold. Zachary didn't show remorse. He showed pride. He believed he'd done something important, something that would inspire others. The community of Pinehurst was devastated. 4 vigils were held in the week following the shooting. Thousands attended. Madison's debate team left an empty podium at their next competition. Derek's swim team retired his number. Olivia's poetry was published in the local newspaper. Christopher's art club dedicated their next show to his memory. But vigils and memorials couldn't answer the question everyone was asking. How did this happen? How did a kid from their community, whose parents were good people, become capable of this? The answer was complicated and uncomfortable. It involved parental blind spots, yes. Linda and Robert Brennan had genuinely not known what their son was consuming online, but it also involved a massive failure of oversight. These radicalization forums operated openly. The manifestos Zachary had studied were available with a simple search. The ideology that convinced a 17-year-old to murder his classmates was spreading unchecked across the internet. Zachary was charged as an adult. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh built a meticulous case. The physical evidence was overwhelming. Security footage, witness testimony, forensic analysis, the manifesto. But Walsh wanted the jury to understand this wasn't just a school shooting. This was premeditated, ideologically motivated murder. This was terrorism. The trial began in November 2019, 7 months after the shooting. The courtroom was packed every single day. The families of the victims attended every session, sitting together in the front row. Madison's mother clutched a photograph. Derek's father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Olivia's parents held hands. Christopher's sister, now 13, drew pictures during breaks, the same way Christopher used to. And Zachary? Zachary smiled. Throughout jury selection, through opening statements, through testimony from students who'd hidden in closets listening to their friends die, Zachary smiled. That same wide, unnatural smile from his first court appearance. The defense attorney, Michael Torres, had an impossible job. His client was guilty, clearly and completely. The best Torres could do was argue for leniency based on Zachary's age, his mental state, the influence of online radicalization. Torres presented expert testimony about adolescent brain development, about how teenagers are particularly susceptible to extremist ideology. He called witnesses who testified that Zachary had been a normal kid before the internet got its hooks in him. But then the prosecution's turn came. Dr. Pierce took the stand and walked the jury through his evaluation. He testified that while Zachary was young and certainly influenced by what he'd read online, he'd understood exactly what he was doing. He'd planned methodically. He'd anticipated consequences. He'd chosen his targets deliberately. The radicalization didn't remove his agency. It gave him permission to act on impulses he already had. The evidence presentation took 2 weeks. The jury saw the manifesto. They heard from the school resource officer. They watched security footage that made multiple jurors cry. They heard from the medical examiner about the injuries, about how Madison and Derek had tried to help each other even as they were dying. They heard from the survivors, students who'd hidden in darkness for hours, who now had PTSD, who couldn't walk into a school without panic attacks, teachers who'd barricaded doors with desks and their own bodies, the janitor who'd found Christopher's body in the stairwell and still couldn't sleep through the night. Through all of it, Zachary smiled. The defense called character witnesses. Zachary's elementary school teacher testified that he'd been a sweet kid who loved dinosaurs. His former soccer coach said he'd been enthusiastic, eager to please. His brother Daniel broke down on the stand, saying he didn't recognize what his younger brother had become. Linda Brennan testified through tears. She talked about reading bedtime stories to Zachary when he was little, about family camping trips, about how proud they'd been when he made honor roll in 8th grade. She said she'd failed as a mother, that she should have known, should have seen the signs. The courtroom sat in heavy silence as this woman grappled publicly with the incomprehensible reality that her son was a murderer. Closing arguments were emotional. Jennifer Walsh stood before the jury and spoke directly about what justice meant in this case. She showed photographs of Madison, Derek, Olivia, and Christopher. Not crime scene photos, photos of them alive, smiling, being teenagers. She talked about their dreams, their families, their futures that would never happen because of ideology and entitlement, and a smile that never wavered even when confronted with the horror he'd caused. Michael Torres made his final plea for the jury to consider Zachary's age, his vulnerability to radicalization, the possibility that with treatment and time, he could develop genuine remorse. He asked them to show mercy even when his client seemed incapable of asking for it himself. The jury deliberated for 8 hours over 2 days. When they returned, the courtroom was silent except for quiet crying from the victims' families. Guilty on all counts. 4 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder of a peace officer, multiple counts of attempted first-degree murder for the students who survived, weapons charges, every single charge, guilty. For the first time since his arrest, Zachary's smile faltered, just for a moment as the reality began to sink in. But the real moment came 2 weeks later at sentencing. Judge Patricia Simmons had presided over the trial with firm professionalism, maintaining order, ruling on objections, keeping the proceedings focused on justice rather than spectacle. But at sentencing, she had the floor. The victims' families gave impact statements. Madison's mother talked about the empty chair at their dinner table. Derek's father described his wife crying herself to sleep every night. Olivia's mother read one of her daughter's poems. Christopher's sister, barely able to speak through her tears, said she'd give anything to have her brother embarrass her one more time. Zachary sat at the defense table, and that smile crept back. He'd regained his composure. This was still his stage. Then Judge Simmons spoke. She looked directly at Zachary Brennan, and her voice cut through the courtroom with surgical precision. She talked about his smile, about his lack of remorse, about how he'd treated this trial like a performance. She said she'd presided over many difficult cases in her career, but rarely had she encountered someone so thoroughly convinced of their own righteousness while being so fundamentally wrong. She addressed the radicalization, acknowledging it was real, but refusing to let it excuse what Zachary had done. She said the internet didn't pull the trigger. Zachary did. The forums didn't choose the victims. Zachary did. The manifestos didn't walk into that school. Zachary did. Then she laid out the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. 4 consecutive life sentences. Additional years for every other charge, each one enumerated clearly and firmly. She said Zachary would never walk free, would never know anything but prison walls, would grow old if he lived that long behind bars, would die there. She said his name would be forgotten while Madison, Derek, Olivia, and Christopher would be remembered. She said he'd wanted to be infamous, but instead, he'd simply become irrelevant. The smile disappeared. Zachary's face went pale. His hands started shaking. For the first time, the reality seemed to crack through whatever delusion had carried him this far. He'd expected martyrdom. He got obscurity and a life sentence before his 18th birthday. The courtroom erupted in quiet relief. The families held each other. Some cried. Some just sat in exhausted silence. Zachary Brennan is currently incarcerated in Colorado's maximum security prison. He's in administrative segregation for his own protection. Reports indicate he spends most of his time in his cell, no longer smiling, no longer performing. The online forums that radicalized him occasionally mention his name, but the attention he craved has largely moved on to the next outrage, the next tragedy. The Pinehurst community has worked hard to heal. Pinehurst High School installed new security systems, hired additional counselors, and implemented threat assessment protocols. The school district now provides training for parents on recognizing signs of online radicalization. The families of the victims established the For Futures Foundation, dedicated to preventing youth radicalization and supporting survivors of school violence. They speak at conferences, work with lawmakers, advocate for better monitoring of extremist content online. A memorial garden was built on the school grounds with 4 benches, each engraved with one of the victims' names. Students gather there between classes. It's become a place for reflection, for remembering, for acknowledging what was lost. Madison Cooper was 16 years old. She wanted to be a civil rights attorney. She made everyone feel included. Derek Yang was 17. He was going to Stanford to study engineering. He tutored younger students and never asked for anything in return. Olivia Santos was 16. She wrote poetry that moved people. She just learned to drive and was excited about the freedom it represented. Christopher Hayes was 15. He loved skateboarding and digital art. His little sister thought he hung the moon. They were real people with families who loved them, futures that mattered, dreams that deserved to come true. They weren't ideology. They weren't statistics. They were Madison, Derek, Olivia, and Christopher. And they deserved so much better than the radicalized teenager who smiled his way through their murder trial until a judge reminded him that justice doesn't care about performance. Rest in peace.